and solvency. And the NDS goes on to talk about delivering performance means we will shed outdated management practices and structures while integrating insights from business innovation. And so, like any strategy document, the question becomes, how do you actually execute on this? How do you make this real? How do you make it happen? And for most folks, it's a complete mystery. And I will say this, that a lot of the language in the National Defense Strategy around innovation is what we would qualify as word salad. Not that it's not brilliant, but it is hard to understand. So, we all like that, so the NDS talks about leveraging what happens in the private sector, right? And when we think about companies that have innovated with products and services, but especially with products, we're all kind of, I'd say, inspired by companies like the Dollar Shave Club, who went from nothing to, I think, a $1 billion plus exit in a remarkably short period of time. Dyson, who re-engineered the entire industry or changed how the vacuum industry looks at engineering. Nest, Bang & Olufsen, Smile Direct, and what these organizations all were able to do from the very beginning is start with a clean slate. Start with with what could be and what's possible. And when we look at operational, creating cultures where that kind of innovation is possible, we think of innovation more as a metaphor. A lot of focus on innovation is really about operationalizing the creation of ideas. And in the Air Force and in defense, we talk about 3 horizons of innovation: process improvement, then a level up of more systemic improvement, and then finally the 3rd horizon is transformational types of innovation. But what we think about, so that is sort of the stuff, as I refer to as, not technically, but yes, that's the stuff of innovation. But what we think about is innovation as a system to drive better outputs, to create a mindset that will deliver the kinds of possible ideas that if we adopt these mindsets, that we will be able to actually innovate and deliver the ideas and change that we want. So we've done that kind of work at Edwards Air Force Base. It's going back a couple of years now. But what we saw, and this is one reason why we talk about culture as a metaphor, what we see is that when you're able to create cultures where innovation can thrive, it actually impacts the ability to do the day-to-day business. Meaning, General Teichert, who until recently was the commander of Edwards Air Force Base, said that in connection with the project we did, the most impactful portion of our innovation journey has been the base-wide cultural change. This intentionally crafted culture change has created a true innovation movement that is improving our ability to achieve the mission and boost quality of life. And the important piece here is really about this idea of ability to deliver the mission and improving quality of life, because fundamentally, folks who are in a mindset of being able to innovate and who are able to deliver the quality of thinking that where innovation thrives are also capable at the same time of delivering the mission better and doing the day-to-day work to a higher level of quality. So I think this is our latest from last year, 2019, culture system theory, and we developed this with a fellow named Benjamin Hardy, PhD, and Dr. Hardy is an author. He just he's had 2 books published in the last few years. First was Willpower Doesn't Work. Second book was more recently is Personality Isn't Permanent. Brilliant guy, great thinker, active in a lot of Medium and a lot of social channels. You might want to check him out. So anyway, so Ben and Gapingvoid collaborated on this, and this this is a theory, like all theories, subject to change and hopefully changing and updating frequently in the future. But we talk about culture as it being truly formed through a banded commitment to a social movement around a particular cause. And I think the insight here is that despite trying to make organizational change, whether it's military, whether it's in the private sector, culture is in fact a social movement. right? And so you create the catalyst to the movement, which deepens and fortifies the social culture. So catalyst might be, something motivating about innovation, but it could also be something about some outcome that you want your organization to have, or something as simple as a change project. Why does this matter, right? And it is what people aim for. It is, you could call that the metaphor, or the vision as part of the metaphor. And so that's what deepens and fortifies the social culture. The design is in creating the movement in a specific direction for that purpose, with specific aims, that is informed and developed in a deliberate fashion. And here's the point. Once you understand where you want to go, and for the purposes of this conversation, innovation, we want to create a more innovative environment, culture on a say an Air Force wing, then what you need to do is to be really clear about the language and very clear about where you're going together as a group of people and why it matters to everybody who gets involved. And so fundamentally, when you are designing for culture, what you're trying to do is drive greater human cooperation. And greater human cooperation results in two really important factors. First is organizing chaos. So we have all walked into organizations, I am sure, we maybe live in organizations day to day, where we feel things are chaotic. It's really hard to get stuff done, right? And so by creating aligned cultures, what we're able to do is organize that chaos, and in the process, reduce complexity. And reducing complexity means that it becomes easier to get things done. People are aligned, they understand where they're going together, they understand how they're going to get there, or they may not know how they're going to get there, but they understand we're on a journey to get to a place, right? And so by creating cultures, you're able to organize the chaos, reduce complexity, that enables you to deliver things like innovation and the activation of new great ideas. So question obviously comes down to how do we design for culture? And there's some principles, some sort of first principles about the way we look at designing culture. And first, that culture is the human operating system of any organization. It is, and we'll talk more about this in a few minutes, but it is a collection of the beliefs and mindsets that inform people's experience and behavior and how they do the work. And by definition, it is the operating system of the human operating system of the organization, business or otherwise, doesn't matter. Private sector, public sector, it doesn't really matter. And that operating system can be programmed and reprogrammed. Programming in terms of what we'll refer to as wet programming in people's heads, as opposed to dry programming, which is in devices, but it can be programmed. And so the point here is that the operating system can and should and must be programmed, but also that when you program it, design it, and execute it, and because you can do that, you can design it and execute it and measure it as you go along. It's actually a system for managing folks. And in our world, it is the most powerful system you have for management, and that's what makes it so compelling. But one of the things that is fundamental to designing culture that we tend to not acknowledge is this idea that that when we show up to work every day, we are biased and oftentimes illogical, and all the time emotional about what we're doing. There's a woman named Jill Bolte Taylor who we did a project with. She was involved in this a few years back at a big enterprise software company in Silicon Valley. And in dealing with Jill, there was a quote, which is, and Jill's done this really wonderful TED Talk. Maybe you've seen it. She's a neuroscientist at Harvard, and she tells a story of waking up one day and realizing she's having a stroke, and what it's like to be a neuroscientist and have a stroke and realize that you know what's going on and have no ability to do anything about it. But it's a great TED Talk. You might want to check it out. But anyway, so Jill talks about this idea that most of us think of ourselves as thinking creatures who feel, but in fact, we are feeling creatures who think. So the insight here is that we feel first and we think second. Danny Kahneman, who's a Nobel Prize-winning behavioral economist and psychologist, said that and I always botch this quote, but it's something, humans are to thinking as cats are to swimming, They'll do it if they have to, but they don't like to. And just to add a third quote, Elon Musk on the Joe Rogan podcast about a year and a half ago, he got in a bunch of trouble because he got high on the podcast and got fined and what have you. But on that podcast, he said that our brains exist to be our brains exist to be in service of our limbic system. And what that means is that there's a whole bunch of things that go on in our head that happen before we ever start to think. And when we design culture, what we really need to do is put into people's heads the beliefs and mindsets that will drive the outcomes that we want. And we'll dig into that a bit more. But just to summarize that piece, so change is made based upon an emotional connection to a future beneficial outcome. So if you want people, and this is something that is very foreign in, say, the Air Force, right? Which is that in a top-down command and control environment, we believe that we're able to simply cascade directives down the chain of command and get them executed. But when it comes to things like innovation, and it comes to voluntary sorts of cooperation and work to be done, then those things do not, the cascading down of orders generally isn't effective, which is one reason why the armed services have struggled so much with innovation, because we need to emotionally connect people to that change. And in the absence of that, then it's very hard to make change happen. So when we think about culture, right, and I haven't seen if there's any questions in the chat, but if there are, feel free. So when we think about culture, very often we focus on core values, and core values is sort of a pet peeve of mine. There's lots of books written about it. There's endless web content around the wonderfulness of core values, and from where we sit, core values are mostly well. Before we get there, it's a challenge, and if you were to scrape the internet, which we have done for your convenience, you will see that these are the most popular core values as reported by hundreds, if not thousands, of companies. And we see things like integrity, boldness, innovation is a core value, diversity, which has long been a core value in many companies, constant improvement, etc. And when you think about these values, right, what you can't help but recognize is that they are expressions of really complex outcomes. Meaning, just because you have a value of fun and passion doesn't mean that people are going to have fun and be passionate. In fact, you could argue the opposite will happen. And so the problem is that these values, core values, in almost every organization are extremely reductive. It is an exercise in extreme reductivism. And reductivism, which is a term that many people aren't familiar with, but is the practice of analyzing and describing a complex phenomena in terms of that are held to represent a simpler, more fundamental level, especially when it's said to provide this is said to provide a sufficient explanation. Meaning, just going back to the list, that's a terrible definition. We're going to change that in the future. So what we see is that you can talk about trust till the cows come home, but there's 1,000 things that people have to understand about trust in order to have trust. And there's a complex web of behaviors that the organization needs to undertake in order for there to be trust. And the same thing is true with diversity. Diversity has been solved, inclusion has been solved, and equity has been solved, or people try to solve it through training for the last generation or two. It doesn't work. It never has worked because it can't be trained. You can't just say we value diversity unless you have a culture that actually is diverse and inspires that and informs those kinds of behaviors. So when you think about that, these core values are a statement of destination, and these statements of destination are not a substitute for the roadmap. The roadmap is really explaining to people how to get there. So how do we get there, right? How do you get those complex outcomes? And so the outcomes are created through what we call belief systems. And this is the fundamental aspect of designing culture. Culture is really about a collection of beliefs and mindsets and mental models and principles and attitudes and worldviews. And yes, values, but not simply values, and values don't come first. that together will drive behaviors to deliver the outcomes that you're seeking to have. And so when we look at designing culture, what you really need to do is to go back and root cause. What is the thinking? What is the psychology? What are the beliefs and mindsets that will deliver the behaviors that you're seeking? And I'll just add to this. When we look at doing change projects in organization and things like digital transformation or any kind of process improvement, we're looking to get improved outcomes. And improved outcomes are usually driven by process. The Six Sigma people come in, the process improvement people come in, and they redesign these outcomes and they say to people, here, go do this instead of that. I know you've been doing it that way, but instead you're gonna do it this way. And this way will give us a more efficient process or what have you, we'll get a better outcome. And so in giving people the new SOP, what you're really saying is behave differently, give us these new behaviors. And what almost every change project fails to do is to go back to the actual psychology that's going on in the person's head. What are the beliefs and mindsets and mental models, et cetera, that will deliver that new behavior? And the only way you will ever get change to stick is by going back to that point and then driving new behaviors so that you get your new outcomes, right? Which is why almost all projects either fail or will have buy-in for a while and then trail off, because people neglect to deal with the true humanity and the beliefs and mindsets. Just to go back to some of what I was saying a few minutes ago about emotion and all of these things take into account the fact that people are fallible, people hate making decisions, that environments are difficult, that it's really hard to make change happen. And culture is what actually takes that into account and moves people down this path to better, more effective outcomes. Okay, so now we come to the fun workshop part, and we've got, hey, so Tom, what time do we need to wrap up by? I think, is it 2:30?
Yeah, 2:30, bottom of the hour, so you've got 20 minutes remaining.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Great. So that went a little quicker than I was hoping. That's awesome. So we're going to talk about limiting and empowering beliefs about innovation. And what this is going to be is sort of design for ourselves, what innovation should be like within an organization. And so the question I want to ask as sort of a premortem, let's just say we launched some innovation project across an organization. It doesn't matter, big group, small group, doesn't matter, right? And if the innovation did not work, right? If it didn't hold, if we didn't get what we wanted, what would have had to have been the beliefs and mindsets that people in the organization held that limited us from making that happen, right? So a couple of examples that might be fear of failure, feeling that resources were unavailable, that we didn't have sufficient sufficient buy-in from senior stakeholders, that no one actually wanted the innovation to work to begin with, that whatever the limiting mindsets would have been, beliefs and mindsets, and we'll go back to that model. Let me just see if, here we go. So what would be the limiting beliefs and mindsets and mental models, principles, worldviews, attitudes that would have caused that project to fail? So we can do this. It's really, Tom, how do you want to do it? Should we go to rooms, or should we just do it in chat, or should people?
Yeah, let's go into 2 rooms. So I've got you assigned to one, and I've got your partner Jeff in the other.
Thanks, Tom.
Welcome back.
How time flies when you're having fun.
It does, for sure.
Okay, cool. So whoever in the other group wants to speak up in terms of what you guys talked about. Does somebody want to sort of share limiting beliefs and mindsets that impact or would be the cause of failure of innovation? Anybody want to go? Jeff, were you in that group? So do you want to?
Yeah, I was taking notes. So basically we got, this is how we've always done it. We got fear of failure. And then also on top of that, fear of not getting leadership buy-in. So basically leadership doesn't listen. Why bother? There's just too many gatekeepers to get to a decision maker, too many forms, and we're just too busy.
Yeah, those sound like the usual suspects. For us, in our group, we touched on fixed mindsets, lack of or perception of lack of resources, and which would lack of leadership buy-in. This idea that previous projects have failed, so this one will too, right? So that's always a cognitive bias. Disruption of entrenched parties. Oh, if this actually works, then we may be a problem for some folks who would be inconvenienced or worse. You see that a lot in private companies, well, in the private sector, where somebody wants to launch some new initiative, and if it is successful, it will put an entrenched party out of business, and that is always the antibodies really come out and kill that stuff. We talked about innovation theater, this idea that I read the HBR article saying we need to be innovating, but they don't really want to, so you go through the motions. A lack of buy-in, lack of support system, lack of alignment, which we talked about in some detail, which is just, are we all on the same page? Do we know what it's for? Do we know where it's going? And then there was, in an engineering environment, sort of differences in disciplines, right? Do the folks developing software and sort of the biology, sort of people working in other areas of sciences, other sciences, do they understand where we're going? And I think that was about it. So what we've established is that there's a list of, let's just say together we came up with 20 items. But if we had more time, we could probably come up with 50 or 60 that really address sort of beliefs and mindsets that we know we would have to shift if we were going to be successful in creating a culture of innovation. Meaning we would have to believe in the possibility that could be done. We'd have to reconcile, and create mindsets around what failure looks like and what we do when things fail. We'd need new mental models around how we bring the sciences together to align to creating cultural norms that would deliver the innovation, etc. Okay, so the next breakout, again, we're just going to do 4 minutes this time, so we have 2 minutes to wrap. Is going to be the opposite. What are the things that we would have to believe in order to have a successful innovation project? Meaning, what are the positive things about possibility, about what are the positive beliefs and mindsets that would put people and create a culture, put the ideas in people's minds so that we could create a culture where innovation could thrive. Tom, can you throw us into our rooms, please? Thanks, Tom. So we literally have a minute left, but we're going to do this super quick. Jeff, pick 3 or 4 off your list.
Well, one of the things that was really interesting that came up was that, it's how you perceive leadership, right? Like, we can't necessarily change what leadership says or does, but we can change the perception of it. So, feeling that they're challenging us instead of just saying no, that they really just are trying to make sure that our ideas are best. We came up with, obviously, failure is lesson learned, have a plan and keep it flexible, push through the initial discomfort / pain, let the best ideas win, all ideas count, these kinds of things.
Well, that's great. I'm just going to share something quick before we bounce off. On our group, this bias to action, we must get stuff done. Team players, support the mission, tolerance for failure, perks, the fact that this is cool, there's some benefits to it, working with cool people. Psychological safety towards the end, like I have freedom to express my ideas. The fact that I feel like I'm on a winning team. I'm trying to fix the world. I'm trying to improve things. Here's some photos of some stuff. This is all from Edwards Air Force Base. And a lot of what we were doing there in terms of fostering innovation culture is really demonizing negative behaviors that got in the way of letting innovation thrive. So it's removing impediments, right? Finding ways to say yes. The idea that I can't remember who was first said we must get this done, like bias to action, this idea innovation shouldn't take a war. That's Chris Klug, who is one of the guys who runs the innovation movement over at Edwards. Feeling uncomfortable is a good sign that you're doing it right, meaning we're not here to feel comfortable about things staying the same. Stop waiting for the old days to return. There's a lot of people who are super invested in things not changing. And as a couple more things before we go. So we think about big organizations as pyramids, top-down command and control. And the thing is, when we are designing culture, what we have to think about is the network connection between people. And a friend of ours named Mark Earl says that culture happens in the spaces between people. And so we have to think about how do we put these beliefs and mindsets in between people as they do their work. And fundamentally, this stuff cannot be trained. Culture is a social construct. So we need to create these belief systems, socialize them, and spread them at scale. And we didn't have time today to get into it, but culture is incredibly powerful. And I just want to talk very quickly about this. About, I don't know, 8-9 months ago, I was asked to go to Detroit to meet with some Ford company executives, and we actually met at the Henry Ford Museum. You walk in there, and there's this brass plaque on the floor. And it commemorates the Wright brothers' first flight, when 120 feet, an altitude of 10 feet, December 1903. And I was looking, and in the floor, there's this brass line that actually goes to the Kitty Hawk or a replica of the plane. And it's really breathtaking in many ways. And one of the things that's so breathtaking about it is if you think about this idea that the Wright brothers' flight was in December of 1903. And it only took us 60 some odd years to go from a distance of 120 feet and an altitude of 10 feet to go to the moon, right? 60 years. And yeah, there was a couple of world wars in between that pushed things along the way. But what this represents is the possibility of culture that's aligned to anything is possible. There was a time in this country when we all believed anything could be done if we set our minds to it. And in designing and harnessing that sort of sentiment within organizations is really powerful. And that's really what we're talking about when we're designing culture. It's not simply motivating people, but it's empowering them to do amazing work and do incredible things. And I think this little story to me was a really motivating thing in terms of helping to understand the power of culture to transform, drive innovation, and really is this idea that it really informs outcomes. So thank you everybody for joining. I really appreciate it. And we will hopefully meet you all soon in some other venue. Thank you.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you so much on behalf of AFWERX and the U.S. Air Force. Really appreciate your strong partnership. I've put your email contact information here in the chat. Anyone who wants to copy that over and reach out to Jason, please feel free. Once again, thanks for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day, and rejoin the live stream at AFWERXfusion.com. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.